Hi everyone, Nanette here from Potential Actually. Our concept of stress has become a bit oversimplified due to popular media. Stress has become a dirty word as it's often only used in reference to bad stress. However, this is a misconception. Not all stress is bad, and in fact, a certain amount of stress is not only good, but also necessary. It really comes down to your level of stress tolerance and finding the balance that's just right for you. The point where you're in the zone, engaged but not overwhelmed. Finding and maintaining that balance is tricky, but there are definitely tools and tips you can use to help you find and better maintain that state. This video will focus on understanding what it means to be in flow and what can take you out of it and how to rebalance when things are getting out of whack. As I mentioned in the introduction, not all stress is created equal, and some stress is even good for you. If you think of stress as being a general category of any triggers, whether external or internal, that cause a reaction in our body, then you can think about stress being broken down into eustress, or those triggers that help motivate us, and distress, those triggers that cause us to shut down. I often find it difficult to get up the motivation to do something unless I have a hard deadline. I need a little bit of stress to kickstart me into action. This is eustress in action, a stress trigger that helps me get my butt off the couch and do something productive. You can tell when it's eustress versus distress because eustress generally motivates and focuses your energy. You feel it well within your coping abilities. It feels exciting and engaging and improves your performance. And most importantly for me, I can tell it's eustress if I feel tired at the end of the day, but oddly energized. There's a sense of serious accomplishment that seems to accompany eustress. Whereas distress often causes concern and anxiety, puts you on edge. You feel like you're outside of your ability to cope or manage. It causes you to shut down, decreasing your performance, and over time causing you mental and physical issues. Ultimately, under distress, even if you accomplish or complete something, you just feel bone weary for having done it. It feels that life has been drained out of you. I often classify the feelings like this. Eustress is a pull where you feel drawn in and engaged, whereas distress feels like a push, or you're only motivated because you're running away from something. Here's what I think is the really cool thing about eustress and distress. There really is an ideal balance. Researcher Amy Arnsten, a professor of neurobiology and psychology at Yale, was able to measure the levels of catecholamine release in the brain attached to different stressors. What's important to understand is that your prefrontal cortex is what assists you in a lot of important activities like rational thought, problem solving. It's a bit of a power hog though. It requires a lot of energy to keep the lights on. So the default is to put your prefrontal cortex to sleep when it's not actively needed. You've probably noticed this happening in your own brain where you have to do a very repetitive task for a long period of time. Eventually you stop paying attention to your surroundings and start daydreaming, making grocery lists, reflecting on a conversation. So there needs to be enough stress that your prefrontal cortex comes out of sleep mode. However, it's also easily overwhelmed, and too much stress will make your limbic system kick in and put your prefrontal cortex out of commission. There's a window of optimal stress where you're engaged and excited, but not overwhelmed. Essentially, there's a stress sweet spot that causes peak performance in our brain. This sweet spot is also often referred to as being in a state of flow. How much of what kind of stress response you need to be in that state of flow varies from person to person, and even for individuals will vary based on the task and situation. If you're in a situation that makes you feel distressed already, and then a trigger is introduced into that situation, like you get a call from your vet and the bill is way more than expected, where you typically be able to stay in a balanced state when faced with this, since you're in a situation where you're already distressed, it ends up being sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back, and you may respond to that instance much more strongly than you typically would. And you might fly off the handle and, yell at the person that's on the other end, where this would not generally be your typical response. The game then is to identify and stay in that state of flow. One of the best things you can do to help yourself stay in flow is to start observing your feelings and emotions as you're in different situations and doing different tasks. This will start to inform you on when you're in eustress and when you're in distress. Knowing that will go a long way to helping you removing distress from your life where possible and focusing your time on energy on those things that create eustress for you. Using an activity log to note the activities you're doing throughout your day and what's filling you up versus tearing you down and what's maybe just simply neutral. Although this type of tracking can seem tedious, it's really well worth the while since it often helps you to uncover trends you may not have noticed or realize the extent of impact an activity might be having on you. There's some other things that you can do that will help you to stay in flow. A Hungarian-American psychologist had studied and wrote a lot about this state and identified some elements that help people to stay in flow. So one is to set clear goals. You can increase your state of flow by having or setting clear objectives and outcomes, or by having an intention and ensuring they feel achievable within the time allotted to do them, so you don't start to take yourself into a distressed place. It needs to feel within your control overall. You want to be challenged, but still within the realm of achievable. So as you set up these goals, it's useful to look at the tasks that you've are going into them and to determine the level of difficulty or the amount of concentration or effort that it'll require from you, and to actually schedule in more intense activities for points in your day where you have more energy. As we go throughout the day, we draw more and more on our mental and physical resources. And so towards the end of the day, we typically have a lot less energy than we do at the beginning. And people's circadian rhythms will change. So some people feel super productive early in the morning, and some people may actually be more productive more into the evenings. So working with that rhythm and scheduling tasks that are more demanding, where you need to be creative or super focused into those times when you have greater energy, will help you a lot. The other thing he suggests is focusing your concentration on the present moment and the activity you're doing. So try to create a space where you can actually get into a state of flow by not having interruptions. This might mean turning off phones and alerts or putting it on do not disturb, but you really want to be able to create a space without constant interruption. Next, there are some mechanisms for immediate feedback that can help you respond or react. So if there's ways to build this into your work, for example, when I'm knitting, I stop to look and make sure my stitches are straight. This is immediate feedback for me on whether what I'm doing is correct or not. Or sometimes I will ask for feedback from my son or husband. They're always very helpful in providing me feedback that's very honest. And this is how we start to adjust in the moment and learn to take in feedback, which can sometimes be stressful, but not generally overwhelmingly stressful, and start to work with that in a way that helps us to make it productive. Finally, activity needs to have a component that's intrinsically motivating. So, whatever you're engaging in, whatever the goal is that you're setting, there needs to be something about it that really speaks to you at sort of that heart or soul level. It can't just be about a paycheck. It can't just be about getting it done and digging in and pushing through. Sometimes you need to do those things, but ultimately, when we engage in those in a long period of time, it does start to put us in a place of distress. So it's not even necessarily that you need to change the activity itself. Sometimes we just need to dig really deep to start better understanding ourselves at a deeper level and what's motivating us to continue choosing to participate in those particular activities or to take them on, and linking into sort of a higher purpose. And I think it's really important, this point around intrinsic motivation. Whether something is eustress or distress is really about perception. One of the things that's truly amazing and inspiring about human beings is our ability to rise to challenges through sheer determination. Even the most trying of situations are bearable and can be ones of extreme growth if we're connected in some way to the purpose and value that's underpinning them. I personally believe any conversation on balance really hinges on how aligned are you to your own purpose and values. In his book Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about the concept of core ideology. He proposes that the more aware an individual is of their values and sense of purpose, the more likely they are to make choices and set goals that are solidly grounded in the core ideology. As the popular author and motivational speaker Simon Sinek would say, it's all about knowing your why. However, we often get so focused on the how of doing something and achieving something that we don't often stop to ask ourselves why. A life coach told me about her story of values and coming to her why. She was stressed, overworked mom. She was driving her kid around to a bunch of hockey games and practices every week. It really had started to take over their lives. She was beginning to feel resentful about how much time she was taking and other things she wasn't getting done by having to do all this running around to get him to games and practices and such. Finally, after complaining for the 100th time to her husband, he finally just asked her, "Why are you doing this then? Why don't you just stop if you hate it so much?" And this question really stopped her in her tracks because she hadn't stopped to take the time to really explore why was she doing this. And her immediate reaction was actually, I have to keep doing this. I can't stop. So after some serious contemplation, she came to realize this was one of the few times she got direct one-on-one time with her son where they were openly sharing with each other, and that she actually loved that time with him. She was deepening her connection while they were running around and they had this dedicated time in the vehicle to just talk. And she knew that the opportunities to take advantage of that were closing more and more the older that he got. And she realized that even though she was fighting traffic to get across town, what was happening in the vehicle at that point in time was actually so important to her because it wasn't really about getting her son to a hockey game. It was actually about connecting with her child, and it was that piece that was really filling her up. After hearing her story, I spent personally a bunch of time identifying and writing out my own values and purpose. I keep them close, and anytime I have a hard decision to make or wonder why I keep engaging in something and if it's worthwhile, I pull them out and I check in on it. I literally go through each value and ask myself if what I am doing and the decision I'm making is bringing me closer to or closer in alignment with my goals and purpose or taking me out. And I started to actually ruthlessly cut things out that were taking me out of alignment. And I really feel my life is so much better for it. It took me down a path that was really scary. I walked away from a really promising, well paying job without anything else lined up. I literally walked into my boss's office, handed in my resignation, and went on a road trip with my family for a month and a half. And then later on, I negotiated a new role for myself that had never existed in our company in a location where we didn't even have an office. And then I packed up my family and moved us to an entirely different province to start a whole new life, building a brand new house, living out of our trailer. Understanding my values and purpose helped me make some of the hardest and scariest decisions of my life. There were major risks attached to what I did, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It feels a little bit sometimes when you are following your purpose and values like you're walking out onto this limb and you're just hoping it's going to support you. I'm not saying that everyone needs to do things that are that drastic or that you need to take drastic action to necessarily be in alignment. When I first started doing this, it was really small steps about making more time to go to the gym, writing in my journal every week, things that were little steps. And eventually that built up to some major life shifts that I needed to make for myself. If overall you're in good alignment, you maybe don't need to make big shifts. Um, but some folks may find that they do. It's a little scary, but it's worthwhile, and you need to trust in where you're going. Um, One of the things for me is that it all comes down to this, and I think Friedrich Nietzsche puts it best. He who has a why can bear almost any how. There are many resources to finding purpose and expressing your values. I'll leave some in the comments section, and I encourage you to give it a try. It's a hard thing to do on your own, so you may want to engage a coach or a relative or a good friend to assist you in doing this. In this session, we looked at how stress is really a broad category, and it's helpful to think in terms of eustress or good stress versus distress or bad stress, and to recognize the activities that create eustress and distress, because this is really important in achieving balance in your life and a sense of flow. Finally, we looked at the importance of having a really explicit purpose and values and taking the time to actually write these out and make them really meaty so that you can compare them to the activities you're doing and see if those activities are in alignment, and that they have that sense of purpose, that sense of intrinsic motivation underneath them. And I shared a bit about my own personal experience with doing this and some of the challenges that I had. Um, and even though it's a lot of work, it's really worth it. And I think Paulo Coelho in The Alchemist sums this up best by saying, tell your heart that the fear of suffering is worse than the suffering itself, and that no heart has ever suffered when it goes in search of its dreams, because every second of the search is a second's encounter with God and with eternity.